Start the sermon tonight, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes for a minute. I know this might feel weird, but most of you are home and alone or with people you love, so no one's judging you. Just close your eyes and try to picture it's nighttime and it's quiet. And there's a beautiful 2-story home with an entire wall of glass. Look in through the windows of this beautiful home and see someone sleeping upstairs, gently dreaming with a smile on their face. Then through the window, notice something's happening downstairs. A person in a mask is breaking in. What are they doing? Looks like they're searching for something valuable to take. The person upstairs wakes up, hearing some commotion downstairs, and heads down to see what's going on. Through the window, you watch, unable to do anything to stop it, unable to change it. You watch as the two of them come face to face, and the homeowner runs to the kitchen and grabs a knife. The intruder, fighting for their own life, stabs the homeowner and runs away, leaving that homeowner alone and fatally wounded. Having just witnessed this horrible act, how do you feel about that intruder right now? What do you think should happen to them? What punishment is deserved? Do they deserve to die for taking someone's life? Okay, part 2 of the exercise. Keep your eyes closed. We're going to try this one more time, but with a very small but important difference. So picture it at nighttime, quietly looking in on a beautiful 2-story home with an entire wall of glass windows. You look through these windows and see there's a person sleeping upstairs. You don't know them, but they seem happy in their beautiful home. And through the window, you notice something happening downstairs. A person in a mask is breaking in. They take off their mask and, oh my God, it's your loved one. You know, that person in your family that sometimes makes bad choices. You know, they might have time to time when they go through really hard situations or in a rough spot, but you love them and you're shocked to see them standing there. What are they doing? They're searching for something valuable to take. They don't want trouble. They just want to quickly grab something and go because they are desperately in need of some cash. And you want to shout at them, what are you doing? Get out of there. But all you could do is watch while this person you love makes a horrible, horrible choice. Then suddenly the person who was sleeping upstairs isn't in their bed any longer. Where are they? Your eyes search. And you watch as the two come face to face. And the stranger runs to the kitchen and grabs a knife. Your loved one is struggling now, fighting for their own life, and in a flash stabs the stranger in self-defense. Shaking, afraid, not knowing what to do next, your loved one runs away, leaving the stranger alone and fatally wounded. How do you feel about this intruder, the one whom you know and love? What do you think should happen to them? What punishment is deserved? Do they deserve to die for taking another person's life? But wasn't it in self-defense? They shouldn't have been there. But they didn't bring a weapon. They didn't take out the knife. What excuses are you making for them in your head? In your heart, do you feel any compassion for this terrified, struggling loved one, even though they have just done something terrible? Open your eyes. Be honest with yourselves. Do you feel differently about this intruder when he or she is someone whom you know and love? Is there a part of you, though broken and horrified that they made this bad choice, that believes they can do better in the future? A part of you that wants to fight for their freedom and their life because you know there's more to them. There's good in them. They are more than the worst thing they've ever done. Years ago, an attorney who worked with death row inmates took me through a similar exercise. How do you defend people who have done such horrible things? I had asked him. He had me picture my own loved ones in order to challenge me to think about how this person's mother, their sister, their daughter might feel and what they think they might deserve. And of course, I understood the importance of every person having a good attorney and fair trials and appeals, regardless of what happened. And of course, I believe that people are more than one choice. And yes, I realize that it was never okay to take someone's life away from them. So that means not even as a state-sanctioned punishment, not even if they did something wrong. Because each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. So I read this week's Torah portion and I don't know how to respond. As we're told in Numbers 15:32 through 36, once when the Israelites were in the wilderness, they came upon a man gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him as he was gathering wood brought him before Moses, Aaron, and the whole community. He was placed in custody, for it had not been specified what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, "The man shall be put to death. The whole community shall pelt him with stones outside the camp." So the whole community took him outside the camp and stoned him to death, as the Lord had commanded Moses. This is what our Torah teaches. We don't even know anything about this man. Who was he? Why was he gathering wood? What did he need it for? Did he know this was against God's rules? Does it matter? How can I read this and not be bothered by God's participation in this man's cruel death? Luckily, my theology allows me to see flaws and mistakes in every biblical character, including God, as a gift for us to learn from. Thankfully, it doesn't shatter my world to think they made a mistake. Rather, I know we should not learn from this by emulating it, but rather by condemning it. But how do we do this when it's in the Torah? Well, Reb Ari Shapiro recently reminded me the Torah is not an end in and of itself. It's just the starting point of our conversations and reflections. So even though there are Torah texts that seem to say capital punishment is appropriate in certain circumstances, we know from Jewish law, history, and tradition that the death penalty is so severe, so final, that our rabbis ensure that to carry it out should be very, very difficult, if not impossible. Maimonides in Sefer HaMitzvot says we are forbidden from punishing someone based on our estimation, even if his guilt is virtually certain. An example of this is a person who was chasing after his enemy to kill him. The pursued escaped into a house and the pursuer entered the house after him. We enter the house after them and find the victim lying murdered, with the pursuer standing over him holding a knife, both covered in blood. The Sanhedrin, the rabbinic court in this case, may not inflict the death penalty on this pursuer, since there were no witnesses who actually saw the murder. The truth of Torah comes to prohibit his execution. As God said, do not kill a person who has not been proven guilty. There's something about this text I had to share. Something about that example that just jumped out. By American standards, that would be a pretty strong witness, and his testimony alone could sentence someone to death. But it's not good enough by Jewish standards. Our rabbis make the standard so high, it's virtually impossible to put anyone to death. And this, we know, is on purpose. For we read in the Mishnah that a Sanhedrin, or high rabbinic court, that would execute somebody once in 7 years was considered destructive. And in response to this, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah speaks up and says, 7? How about once in 70 years? Once in 70 years is destructive. To which Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva said, if we were on the Sanhedrin, nobody would have ever been executed. Why? Maybe because they know people are more than the worst things they've ever done. Maybe because they know people, all of them, even those who make mistakes, are precious to God. Maybe because state-sanctioned murder is still murder. Maybe because, as Albert Campus writes, when the extreme penalty simply causes vomiting on the part of the respectable citizen it is supposed to protect, how can anyone maintain that it is likely, as it ought to be, to bring more peace and order to the community. Rather, it is obviously no less repulsive than the crime, and this new murder, far from making amends for the harm done to the social body, adds a new blot to the first one. And I know some people argue that such harsh punishments are needed to deter people from crime, but all the evidence seems to suggest that capital punishment in no way deters anyone. Criminals tend to believe they will escape any consequences or simply don't consider the consequences at all, meaning an escalation of consequences is irrelevant to their state of mind at the time of a crime. Jewish attorney and former Senator Russ Feingold once pointed out that following the logic of those who believe the death penalty is a deterrent, you would think that European countries who do not use the death penalty would have a higher murder rate than the United States. Yet they don't. And it's not even close. In fact, the murder rate in the United States is 6 times higher than the murder rate in Britain, 7 times higher than in France, 5 times higher than in Australia, and 5 times higher than in Sweden. He even pointed out that the murder rate in a state like Texas, where the death penalty is still used, has about double the murder rate as his own state of Wisconsin, which abolished use of the death penalty nearly 150 years ago. So it's not a deterrent. It doesn't work. But even if it was, if somehow we found out that capital punishment did in fact deter a person, is it worth it then? Still no. I think Maimonides explains it best when he writes, "It is better and more satisfactory to acquit 1,000 guilty persons than to put a single innocent one to death." And let's be honest, in America, plenty of innocent people are being put to death. Our education system, social welfare system, policing system, jail system, and court systems are just a few things in America that are deeply flawed. If this is news to you, I have a number of books, movies, and statistics I can share with you, as we are all on this journey together to wake up to the reality that our Black brothers and sisters face in this country. I have a colleague who claims that she was forever changed by reading the book Just Mercy, where Bryan Stevenson intimately described trial after trial of unfair practices against Black men. I can only imagine how deeply it moved her, as I felt pretty impacted simply from watching the movie adaptation this week. It shares the stories of innocent people who spend years on death row with the threat of execution, only some exonerated in time. The reality of our flawed justice system is shocking, and this is just one of many books and movies that tell this story. Which is why at the last CCAR conference in Cincinnati, the Central Conference of American Rabbis heard from Bryan Stevenson, the author of this book, Just Mercy, who heads the Equal Justice Initiative and fights for racial justice. The statistics that he shared with us were striking. In 1972, there were 300,000 people in jail. Today, there are 2.3 million. We have one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. Often wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. Racial disparities persist at every level, from misdemeanor arrest to executions. And in this vein was the most striking thing he said, something truly horrible, which is that 1 in 3 Black male babies will be incarcerated in their lifetime. Did you hear that? 1 in 3. They are not all criminals, yet their lives and their existence every day, all day, is absolutely influenced by the color of their skin. Which is why the Equal Justice Initiative clearly states on their website that racial disparities in our criminal justice system are a legacy of our history of racial injustice in this country, and implicit biases have been shown to affect policing and all aspects of the criminal justice system. There's more. The quotes I wanted to read you are long, and there's so much to say, but I know this isn't a new conversation. Yes, this brings us back to our conversation from the past 2 Friday evenings about racial injustice in this country. But tonight, our Torah portion encourages us to zero in on the topic of racial discrimination in our criminal justice system, and specifically as it relates to capital punishment. Our Jewish values teach us there must be complete and total certainty before capital punishment can even be considered. And our reality is a criminal justice system that is terribly flawed, especially by racial bias. So do you really think you can put people to death and never execute a person who was actually innocent? Of course not. Unfortunately, our American justice system does not require the same level of certainty that was required by the Sanhedrin, the Great Rabbinic Court. And even they ultimately made the punishment of death impossible to justify. So regardless of what our Torah portion says transpired in the wilderness, Jewish tradition knows that if there is any possibility of innocence, death should never be an option. And we as Jews know that even guilty people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. Their lives still have value, and we still have no right to be murderers. Then we need to look upon convicted criminals and see their possible innocence, see the possible extenuating factors, look at them with the eyes of their mothers and grandmothers, and hope for them what we would want for our own loved ones, had they been the one who committed this horrible act. We as Jews need to call for an end to the death penalty in our country and start demanding, like our rabbis, that justice be held to an outrageously high standard. This is another important way we can begin to demand that our country value Black lives, by insisting that nobody, not even the government, has the right to take someone's life away. That's what Maimonides would say. That's what Rabbi Akiva would say. This is what we all must say. As always, I invite everyone who would like to discuss this more to reach out to me directly. I'm always here to discuss this one-on-one. Again, this conversation is only just beginning, because this problem will take more than one sermon to solve it. If you would like to be more involved in this conversation, in our upcoming book group, in our dialogue with our Black neighbors, please reach out and let me know. We need everyone who wants the world to change to step up and be the change we need to see.